With me now is Sherilyn Ifill, the President and Director Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, a separate organization from the NAACP. Thanks so much for being here with us, Sherilyn. You were inside that meeting. Set the scene for us. What was it like?
Well, first of all, the scene is the context, and the context is the last week in which we had the killing in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the killing in St. Paul, Minnesota, and then the tragic murder of the 5 police officers in Dallas. So there was a heavy vibe in that room. Many of us are coming laden with pain and a tremendous amount of sleepless nights and work. And so we came and we sat around the table, and President Obama set the stage by asking us to be candid and blunt with one another, but to speak respectfully, and most of all to focus on solutions. He asked each of us to share what we think is a core issue that can be addressed. It's important to remember that this is the federal government, the president is the president of the United States, and law enforcement happens largely at the local level. Yeah. So we were aware of the limitations of the portfolio, but it was still a very, very important, I think, and very rigorous conversation.
Did anybody have their guards up, or were people pretty open-minded, do you think?
I think everybody initially had their guard up, and I'm not going to say it, it fell entirely.
Yeah.
What the president asked us to do was listen, and I have to say that I think the most moving part of the meeting was that we were listening to one another and we were hearing. We talked about the pain. You just in that clip had Charles Blow talking about, the toolkit that African-American children need to survive in their encounters with the police. And we talked about what the demoralization of that pain and the need for law enforcement to acknowledge the reality of racial bias in policing.
It's not just perception.
It's not perception, it's not imagination, it's real. And I think that's why those 2 videos from Louisiana, but particularly from Minnesota, so moved this country, not just African Americans, to hear Diamond Taylor narrating the aftermath of this shooting and narrating the death of her fiancé, and not able to comfort her child, but having to create a record because we've not been believed when we've described what happened, and we know what will happen if we don't have a record.
What contributions did you bring to the table?
Yeah, I talked about 2 things. One of them Athena just discussed, and one of them she didn't. The first thing I talked about was the federal role that can be played through funding. The federal government gives over $2 billion in grants to police departments and local law enforcement, a lot of taxpayer money every year. And that money needs to be contingent on police departments demonstrating that they don't engage in discrimination. That's required under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So what we've been asking is for the federal government to really scrub those grant programs and ensure that local jurisdictions are doing anti-bias training, that they're collecting the data, that they're training police officers in how to deal with the mentally ill, how to de-escalate, and so forth. That was one issue, and we spent actually a great deal of time talking about those resources. And then the second one was one Athena mentioned, which is the accountability piece. There weren't enough, in my view, prosecutors in the room. There was one attorney general. They're part of the equation. We've got to ensure that when police officers break the law, that they're held accountable and that they're subject to the rule of law just like average citizens.
Real quickly, how optimistic are you that that meeting is going to make a change going forward?
I think the meeting was really important because we were all face-to-face. Some of us were in a room with people that we otherwise would never be in a room with. And I do think that when you have an opportunity to talk to someone face-to-face, there are people we can follow up with, because I think the follow-up is the most important.
And knowing who's who also.
Knowing who's who and being able to say, listen, we talked in that meeting. I want to talk to you about what's happening today in Baton Rouge. In fact, I'll be making some of those calls myself.
Good.
Because we have lawyers in Baton Rouge working around the issue of protesters and violence by police officers. So we at least have the opening to begin to continue that dialogue at the local level.
Well, that is very good to hear. Thank you so much, Sherilyn, for joining us. We really appreciate it.